crossing the road just outside of town. The employee described it as looking like a massive dog, but said that it ran on two legs, not four.
It already looked massive, but this thing must have been 7 foot plus.
That is giant.
Something is moving through the forests of northern Michigan, and the numbers are impossible to ignore. Researchers and independent investigators who track unusual wildlife encounters across the Great Lakes region are now reporting that documented sightings of what locals call the Michigan Dogman have reached levels not seen in 5 decades. The sheer volume of reports flooding into cryptid research databases, local news tip lines, and online communities dedicated to unexplained phenomena has prompted serious discussion about what exactly is happening in the dense wilderness corridors of Michigan's Lower Peninsula. Whether you believe these accounts reflect a real and unknown creature, misidentified wildlife, or a powerful regional mythology feeding on itself, the pattern emerging on territory maps is genuinely difficult to dismiss. Counties that had gone years without a single report are suddenly generating multiple accounts per season. And the geography of where these sightings are clustering tells a story all its own. To understand why this moment feels different from previous waves of dogman interest, you have to understand the history behind the legend and why it has never fully gone away. The earliest documented written account connected to this mystery dates back to 1887 in Wexford County, deep in the lumber country of northwestern Michigan. At that time, this part of the state was dominated by isolated logging camps where workers spent months surrounded by vast old-growth forest, far from any town or settlement. 2 timber workers reportedly described seeing an upright, canine-like figure standing at the tree line, watching them in silence before calmly walking back into the woods. The account was unusual enough to be recorded, but it remained buried in local archives for generations, largely forgotten outside the immediate region. What makes that early report significant today is not that it proves anything, but that it establishes a geographic anchor. Wexford County sits at the heart of what researchers now call the primary sighting corridor, and more than a century later, that same corridor is generating more reports than at any point in living memory. The legend stayed mostly regional until 1987, when a Traverse City radio disc jockey named Steve Cook recorded a song called The Legend as an April Fool's Day joke, pulling from old folklore and scattered local rumors. Cook expected a few laughs and some listener engagement before the whole thing faded away. What happened instead was remarkable. The song spread rapidly across northern Michigan and triggered an unexpected wave of contact from real people who said they had seen something similar themselves. Hunters, farmers, truck drivers, campers, and rural residents began reaching out to share experiences they had kept private for years, in many cases decades, out of fear of ridicule. Cook preserved those letters, and they became one of the earliest systematic collections of Dogman witness testimony. What researchers noted when examining that archive was the consistency of detail across accounts from people who had no connection to one another. Witnesses repeatedly described a large, muscular, canine-featured creature standing between 6 and 7 feet tall, moving on 2 legs with a fluid and purposeful gait, and displaying unusual awareness of human presence without immediately charging or attacking. That archive from 1987 is now being compared directly to the current surge in reports, and investigators say the similarities are striking. So what does the territory map actually show, and why are researchers describing it as disturbing? When you plot the known sighting reports from the past several years against historical records, a defined geographic shape begins to emerge. The highest concentration of encounters runs through a band of counties in the northwestern Lower Peninsula, including Wexford, Manistee, Benzie, Mason, and Grand Traverse. This corridor follows a natural landscape pattern of dense mixed hardwood and conifer forest broken up by river systems, wetlands, and glacial lake chains. The Manistee River runs directly through the heart of this zone, and a disproportionate number of sighting reports, both historical and recent, come from areas along its banks or within the forested bluffs above it. This is not random. The river system creates natural travel corridors through otherwise impenetrable terrain, and wildlife of all kinds use these routes. What makes the current map disturbing to those who study it is not just the concentration within the historical corridor, but the expansion beyond it. Reports are now appearing from counties that historically had little to no dogman activity, including areas further south and east that border more populated regions. Whether this represents an expanding range, an increase in outdoor recreation placing more observers in wild areas, or simply the effect of social media making it easier for people to report experiences, the result is a map that looks fundamentally different from what researchers were working with even 10 years ago. The environmental context matters enormously here. Michigan's northern forests have undergone significant changes in recent decades. Timber harvesting patterns, changing precipitation, shifting wildlife populations, and the gradual effects of climate variation on forest composition have all altered the landscape in ways that affect how animals move and where they concentrate. Wolf populations, which were reintroduced and have been slowly recovering across the Upper Peninsula, have been documented crossing into the Lower Peninsula with increasing frequency. Coyote populations remain high throughout the region. Black bears range widely across the forested counties and are well established in exactly the zones where dogman sightings cluster. Investigators who approach this subject with scientific skepticism consistently point to these known species as the most plausible explanation for the majority of encounters, particularly those occurring in low light conditions, at distance, or involving partial glimpses. A black bear rearing up on its hind legs to investigate a smell can reach heights that genuinely alarm witnesses who are not prepared for it. Large coyotes or coy-wolf hybrids, which are common in Michigan, can appear wolf-like in poor visibility. These are not dismissive explanations. They are reasonable and they account for a significant portion of reported encounters. But the accounts that are hardest to categorize are not the brief glimpses or distant silhouettes. They are the extended, close-range encounters reported by witnesses who have considerable experience in the outdoors and who describe sustained observation of something that does not match any animal they have encountered before. One account from a licensed guide working a remote stretch of the Manistee National Forest describes watching a large, upright figure move deliberately through an open logging cut for several minutes in early morning light. The guide, who has spent decades in the Michigan backcountry and is professionally familiar with bears, wolves, and large deer, states that the movement pattern was unlike any known animal. The figure moved on 2 legs throughout the entire observation, never dropping to 4, and crossed the open area at a steady walking pace before entering the tree line on the far side. Reports like this one do not come with evidence that can be independently verified, but they come from individuals whose background gives them credibility as observers, and they keep appearing in the current surge of accounts. The behavior patterns described across multiple recent reports share consistent details that researchers find notable precisely because the witnesses often have no apparent knowledge of each other or of the established folklore. The creature is repeatedly described as watchful rather than aggressive. In encounter after encounter, witnesses describe something that appears aware of their presence but does not immediately flee or attack. It pauses, observes, and then moves away on its own terms. This behavioral signature appears in the 1987 archive, in reports from the intervening decades, and in the current wave of accounts. Another repeated detail is the effect the creature's presence appears to have on the surrounding environment. Witnesses consistently describe an unusual silence descending during encounters, birds stopping mid-call, squirrels freezing, normal forest background noise cutting off entirely. This phenomenon is not unique to dogman reports. Wildlife researchers have documented similar silence responses in the presence of apex predators that animals recognize as serious threats. The fact that witnesses independently describe this effect without appearing to know it is a common feature of such encounters suggests it may reflect something real about the encounter conditions, even if the identity of what triggered it remains open. The territory map becomes even more interesting when you overlay it with infrastructure data. The sighting corridor corresponds closely with the boundaries of state forest land, national forest designations, and areas with the lowest road density in the lower peninsula. These are places where a large animal could theoretically move significant distances without being observed, using river bottoms, ridge lines, and dense cover to avoid detection. Wildlife biologists use exactly this kind of habitat analysis when tracking known species like mountain lions, which have been confirmed in Michigan on multiple occasions in recent years despite being considered locally extinct. The point is not that a large unknown animal is definitely present in these forests. The point is that the geography of the sighting reports aligns almost perfectly with the geography of habitat that would support a large, elusive animal that actively avoids human contact. That alignment is what makes the territory map worth taking seriously as a document, even for people who begin from a position of skepticism. The increase in sighting reports also has to be understood in the context of how information is collected and shared today versus how it was collected in previous decades. Trail cameras have become inexpensive and widely used among hunters and wildlife enthusiasts throughout Michigan. Tens of thousands of these cameras are operating across the forested counties at any given time, collectively representing an unprecedented surveillance network covering terrain that was previously unobserved through most of every season. Smartphones mean that nearly every person who goes into the woods carries a camera, a recording device, and immediate access to platforms where unusual experiences can be shared within minutes. Online communities specifically dedicated to tracking unexplained encounters have made it dramatically easier for witnesses to report and for researchers to collect accounts systematically. All of these factors would increase the volume of reported sightings even if the underlying phenomenon had not changed at all. Researchers acknowledge this openly. But they also note that the quality and detail of recent reports, and the geographic specificity now possible because witnesses can share precise GPS coordinates, has produced a dataset that is in some ways more useful than anything available from earlier periods. What the current surge has not produced, and what skeptics correctly identify as the decisive missing element, is physical evidence that satisfies scientific standards. No body, no bone, no tissue sample, no clear and verified photographic or video evidence of something that cannot be explained as a known animal has emerged from the hundreds of recent reports. This absence matters. The forests of Michigan are extensively studied by wildlife biologists, state game managers, and university researchers. Large mammals leave physical traces. They are captured on trail cameras. They leave hair, scat, tracks, and other biological material that accumulates in databases. If a genuinely novel large animal existed in the numbers that the sighting frequency might suggest, the scientific community would expect to have encountered hard evidence by now. This is the argument that responsible investigators, including those who take witness accounts seriously, cannot simply wave aside. The gap between what witnesses describe and what physical evidence can confirm remains the central unresolved tension in this entire subject. And yet the accounts keep coming. A veteran deer hunter with 40 years of experience in Manistee County describes watching a 7-foot figure stand motionless at the edge of a cornfield at dusk before turning and walking back into the forest edge with what he describes as a completely human stride. A pair of kayakers on a remote section of river report footsteps matching their pace along the high bank above them for nearly a mile, sounds that stopped when they stopped and resumed when they paddled again, accompanied by deep, steady breathing from the vegetation. A rural property owner in Mason County installs cameras after repeated incidents with livestock and captures footage of a tall, upright figure at the forest edge in the early hours of the morning, footage blurry enough to be dismissed and clear enough to be unsettling. None of these accounts prove anything individually. Together, concentrated in the same geographic corridor and sharing the same behavioral details, they form a pattern that investigators say is unlike the noise of random misidentification spread across a population. What is happening in the forests of northwestern Michigan right now is genuinely uncertain. The honest answer, the one that respects both the witnesses who have shared difficult and sometimes frightening experiences and the scientific standards that protect us from believing things without evidence, is that we do not know. The territory map is disturbing not because it proves a creature exists, but because it shows something consistent and geographically structured that has been repeating for well over a century and is currently doing so at a rate not seen in 50 years. Whether the explanation turns out to be a known animal behaving in ways not yet fully documented, a regional folklore so powerful it shapes perception in predictable ways, some genuine unknown biological entity, or some combination of all three, the pattern deserves serious attention rather than reflexive dismissal. The forests of Michigan are old and vast and full of things that move in the dark. People who live near them and work in them keep seeing something. The map of where they see it is becoming harder to ignore.